The blood on his hands was still wet when he saw her kneeling by the creek, her fingers delicately arranging wildflowers in a small woven basket. And for the first time in 3 years, Samuel Xavier forgot about the men he had been hunting. He had been riding hard from Georgetown, Colorado, tracking 2 horse thieves who had stolen from the livery where he worked as a ranch hand and occasional bounty hunter. It was late April in 1878, and the mountains still held patches of snow despite the warming days. Samuel had caught up with the thieves just an hour before, and the confrontation had ended badly. One man had drawn his gun, and Samuel had been faster. The other had run off into the hills, and Samuel had let him go, suddenly tired of the chase, tired of the violence, tired of everything that had defined his life since the war ended. Now, at 26 years old, with dust coating his dark hair and weariness etched into the lines around his eyes, he found himself staring at a young woman who seemed entirely out of place in this rugged wilderness. She wore a simple cotton dress the color of cornflowers, and her auburn hair was pulled back in a long braid that fell past her shoulders. She was humming something soft and melodic, unaware of his presence. Samuel dismounted quietly, leading his horse toward the creek to drink. The movement caught her attention, and she looked up sharply, her green eyes widening with alarm. She was on her feet in an instant, the basket clutched protectively against her chest. "I did not mean to startle you, miss," Samuel said, raising one hand in a peaceful gesture while holding his horse's reins with the other. "Just need to water my horse." She studied him carefully, her gaze taking in his worn leather vest, the gun at his hip, and the exhaustion evident in his posture. "You are alone?" "Yes, madam." She seemed to relax slightly, though her posture remained cautious. "The creek is for everyone. You can water your horse." Samuel nodded his thanks and led the animal forward. As the horse drank deeply, he found himself watching the woman as she slowly knelt back down by the flowers. There were clusters of wild columbine growing along the bank, their delicate blue and white petals nodding in the gentle breeze. She was selecting them with care, examining each stem before adding it to her collection. "Are you a botanist?" he asked, surprising himself. He was not usually one for conversation with strangers. She glanced up at him, and he saw the hint of a smile touch her lips. "No. I just appreciate beauty where I find it. There is little enough of it in this world." "That is the truth," Samuel agreed. He crouched down by the water's edge, cupping his hands to drink. The cold mountain water tasted clean and pure, washing away some of the dust from his throat. When he looked at her again, he found her watching him with those clear green eyes. "You look like you have been riding hard," she observed. "I have been tracking horse thieves, caught up with them a ways back. And the thieves? One will not be stealing again. The other ran off." She nodded slowly, as if this was exactly the kind of answer she had expected. "You are a lawman." "Not exactly. I work at a ranch near Georgetown, but sometimes I take on tracking work when someone needs help. The horses they took belong to a friend. Georgetown is a full day's ride from here." "About that, yes." She returned her attention to the flowers, and Samuel found himself reluctant to move on. There was something peaceful about this spot, about watching her work with such gentle concentration. It was a stark contrast to the violence of the morning. "What is your name, miss?" He asked after a moment. She hesitated, then said, "Zara. Zara Jenkins. Samuel Xavier. People call me Sam." "Well, Sam, you look like you could use some rest. There is a farm about a mile south of here. My family's place. We do not have much, but we can offer you a meal and a place to rest your horse. I could not impose. It is not imposing if it is offered." She stood, brushing dirt from her dress. "Besides, my father appreciates news from town. We do not get many visitors." Samuel considered refusing, but the thought of a home-cooked meal and perhaps a place to wash the blood from his hands was too appealing to resist. "If you are sure it would not be a burden." "I am sure." She picked up her basket and started walking along a narrow path that led away from the creek. Samuel gathered his horse's reins and followed. As they walked, Zara talked about the flowers she had collected. She knew the name of each one, not just their common names, but what the native people called them, what medicinal properties they held, what time of year they bloomed. Her voice had a musical quality that made even botanical facts sound like poetry. "You know a lot about plants," Samuel observed. "My mother taught me. She was half Ute, and she learned from her grandmother. She said that understanding the land meant understanding what grows from it." Zara glanced back at him. "She passed 2 years ago." "I am sorry for your loss. Thank you. She was a good woman, strong and kind, which is not always an easy combination." The farm came into view as they crested a small rise. It was a modest operation with a weathered wooden house, a barn that had seen better days, and a few paddocks containing chickens and 2 dairy cows. A man was working in a vegetable garden near the house, his back bent as he worked a hoe between rows of emerging plants. "Papa," Zara called out. "We have a visitor." The man straightened, shading his eyes against the afternoon sun. He was perhaps 50, with graying brown hair and the lean, weathered build of someone who had spent his life working the land. His expression was cautious, but not unfriendly as they approached. "This is Samuel Xavier from Georgetown," Zara explained. "He has been tracking horse thieves and could use a meal and some rest. I told him we could help." Her father set aside his hoe and extended a dirt-stained hand. "Thomas Jenkins. Any friend of my daughter is welcome here." Samuel shook his hand, noting the firm grip despite the man's age. "I appreciate the hospitality, sir. I do not want to be a burden." "No burden at all. We do not see many people out this way." Thomas gestured toward the barn. "You can stable your horse there. We will get some food together." Inside the house, it was simple but clean. The main room served as both kitchen and living space, with a stone fireplace at one end and a wooden table with 4 mismatched chairs in the center. Zara set her basket of flowers on a sideboard and immediately began preparing food, while her father pumped water into a basin for Samuel to wash. As Samuel cleaned his hands, watching the water turn pink and then clear again, he felt some of the tension leave his shoulders. This place had a peaceful quality that reminded him of his own family's home before the war, before everything had changed. "So you work at a ranch in Georgetown?" Thomas asked, settling into one of the chairs. "Yes, sir. The Running Creek Ranch, owned by Marcus Sullivan. I have been there about a year now." "Good man, Marcus. I met him a few times when I used to make the trip to town more regularly. Getting too old for that ride now, though." Zara brought over a plate of cold chicken, fresh bread, and cheese. It was simple fare, but Samuel ate with genuine appreciation. As he ate, Thomas asked about news from Georgetown, and Samuel shared what he knew about the growing mining operations, the new families moving in, the talk of bringing a railroad spur to the area. "Things are changing fast," Thomas said with a shake of his head. "Sometimes I think we chose the right place by staying out here, away from all that commotion. Other times I wonder if we are just hiding from progress." "There is nothing wrong with wanting peace and quiet," Samuel said. "Too many people chasing after gold and silver, forgetting that there are other things worth having." Zara had been listening quietly while she worked at the sideboard, arranging her wildflowers in a ceramic pitcher filled with water. Now she turned and looked at Samuel with an expression he could not quite read. "What things do you think are worth having?" she asked. The question caught him off guard. He thought about it for a moment before answering. "A place to call home, people you care about, work that matters." Simple things, I suppose, but they seem harder to find than gold these days. Those are not simple things, Zara said softly. Those are the most important things. Their eyes met, and Samuel felt something shift in his chest. She was beautiful. He had noticed that immediately, but it was more than her appearance. There was an intelligence in her eyes, a gentleness in her manner, and a strength that reminded him of his own mother. Thomas cleared his throat, breaking the moment. "Well, Samuel, you are welcome to rest here for the night if you need. We have a small room in the barn that is clean and dry, better than sleeping on the ground. I am grateful for the offer, but I should probably get back to Georgetown before dark. That is still several hours of hard riding, and your horse looks tired. Better to rest and start fresh in the morning." Samuel knew the older man was right. His horse did need rest, and the truth was, he was not eager to return to Georgetown just yet. The thought of spending a peaceful evening here, away from the noise and chaos of town, was appealing. "If you are sure it would not be an imposition." "Not at all," Thomas said warmly. "In fact, I could use your help with something if you do not mind. I have been trying to repair a section of the barn roof, but I need someone to hold the ladder steady. These old bones are not as reliable as they used to be. I would be happy to help." They spent the next few hours working on the barn. Samuel discovered that Thomas was a thoughtful man with a dry sense of humor and a wealth of knowledge about farming and ranching. He had come west from Pennsylvania 20 years ago with his young wife, looking for opportunity and adventure. They had found both, along with hardship and loss. "Zara is my youngest," Thomas explained as they worked. "I had 2 sons, but one died from fever when he was just 12, and the other headed to California 5 years ago. Have not heard from him in almost 2 years now. I try not to think the worst, but it is hard not to. I am sure he is fine. Mail is unreliable out here. Maybe. Zara stays here with me, helps keep the place running. She is a good daughter, but I worry about her sometimes. She should be married, starting her own family, not taking care of an old man." Samuel did not know what to say to that, so he focused on holding the ladder steady while Thomas hammered shingles into place. But the words stayed with him, and he found himself wondering about Zara's story. She seemed too educated, too refined to have spent her whole life on this isolated farm. There was a sadness in her eyes that spoke of disappointment or loss. When they finished with the roof, the sun was beginning to set, painting the western sky in shades of orange and gold. Zara called them in for supper, and they sat around the table eating stew made from vegetables and salt pork. It was hearty and filling, exactly what Samuel needed. After the meal, Thomas excused himself to bed, claiming that old age required more sleep. Samuel suspected the man was giving him time alone with Zara, though he could not imagine why. They sat at the table together, the only light coming from a lantern and the dying fire in the hearth. "Your father is a good man," Samuel said. "He is. He has had a hard life, but he never complains." Zara was working on some mending, her needle moving with practiced efficiency through a torn shirt. "Tell me about yourself, Sam. Where are you from originally?" "Missouri. Small town outside of Kansas City. My family had a farm, nothing big, just enough to keep us fed and busy. I left to fight in the war when I was 18. Which side?" "Union. My father did not believe in slavery, said no man had the right to own another. I agreed with him, still do. The war has been over for 13 years now. Why did you not go back home?" Samuel was quiet for a long moment. "There was nothing to go back to. My parents died while I was gone. My sister married and moved to Illinois. The farm was sold to pay debts. By the time I got home, it was not home anymore. I am sorry. It was a long time ago," but the pain in his voice suggested otherwise. I drifted for a while, did some work on cattle drives, spent time in Texas and Kansas. Eventually made my way up to Colorado. The mountains reminded me of what I had read about in books when I was young. Seemed like a good place for a fresh start. And did you find it? Your fresh start? I thought I had. The ranch is good work, and Marcus treats his people fairly. But sometimes I wonder if I am just drifting again, only staying in one place while I do it. Zara set down her mending and looked at him directly. What would make you stop drifting? It was another one of those questions that seemed to cut right to the heart of things. Samuel found himself wanting to answer honestly, even though he barely knew this woman. I suppose the same things I mentioned earlier. A home, people who matter, a reason to put down roots. He paused. What about you? Your father says you should be married with your own family. Why are you still here? A flicker of pain crossed her face. I was engaged once, 3 years ago. His name was Michael Carter, and he was a school teacher who came to Georgetown. We met when I went to town with my father to sell vegetables. He was educated, well-spoken, kind. Everything I thought I wanted. What happened? He took a position in Denver and asked me to come with him. I was ready to say yes, but then my mother got sick. I could not leave her, and I could not ask my father to manage alone. Michael said he understood, that he would wait. But when my mother died 6 months later, I got a letter from him. He had married someone else, a doctor's daughter in Denver. He said he hoped I understood. That must have been difficult. It was. Not just losing him, but realizing that he had not really been willing to wait, that his love was conditional. It made me question everything I thought I knew about him, about us. She picked up her mending again, her fingers moving mechanically. Since then, I have stayed here with my father. There are not many options for women out here. I could move to town, perhaps find work as a seamstress or a cook, but that feels like running away. This is my home. These mountains, this land, they are part of who I am. Your father is lucky to have you, and I am lucky to have him. She looked up and smiled, and Samuel felt his breath catch. But I will not lie and say I do not think about what my life might have been. Sometimes I wonder if I made the right choice. You chose love and loyalty over your own wants. That takes strength. Or perhaps it was fear. Fear of leaving what I know, fear of failing in a new place. She set the mending aside and stood. I should let you get some rest. The barn room is ready for you. There are blankets and a pillow, and it should be comfortable enough. Samuel stood as well. Thank you, Zara, for the food, the hospitality, the conversation. It has been a long time since I talked to someone like this. Like what? Honestly. Most people in town, they want to hear stories about the war or about tracking outlaws. They see me as something I am not, or maybe something I used to be but do not want to be anymore. You just listened. She smiled again, softer this time. Sometimes that is what people need most. Someone to listen. They stood there for a moment, the space between them feeling both vast and very small. Then Zara moved toward the door, and Samuel followed. She showed him to the barn room, which was indeed small but clean, with a cot and blankets and a small window that looked out toward the mountains. "Good night, Sam," she said from the doorway. "Good night, Zara." He lay awake for a long time after she left, staring up at the rough wooden beams of the barn ceiling. He kept thinking about her words, about the choices she had made and the life she had built here. There was something about her that called to him, something that made the empty places inside him ache with longing. He woke before dawn, as was his habit, and went outside to find the world wrapped in a silver mist. The air was cold and clean, and somewhere in the distance, a bird was singing its morning song. Samuel walked down to the creek where he had first seen Zara, and he stood there watching the water flow over smooth stones. "You are up early." He turned to find her approaching with a bucket, presumably to fetch water. She had wrapped a shawl around her shoulders against the morning chill, and her braid hung over one shoulder. "Old army habits," he explained. "Once you learn to wake before dawn, it stays with you. I am usually the first one up too. I like the quiet of the morning before the day gets busy and loud." She knelt by the water and began filling her bucket. "Did you sleep well?" "I did. Better than I have in months, actually." She glanced up at him. "Will you stay for breakfast before you go?" "If it would not be too much trouble." "No trouble at all." They walked back to the house together, and Samuel found himself acutely aware of her presence beside him. When their hands accidentally brushed, he felt a jolt of electricity that had nothing to do with the cold air. Over breakfast, Thomas talked about his plans for planting that year and asked Samuel's advice on a few matters related to livestock. Samuel found himself offering more than just advice. Before he quite knew what he was saying, he had suggested that he could come back in a few weeks to help with some of the heavier work around the farm. "You do not need to do that," Thomas said, though his eyes were hopeful. "You have your own work at the ranch. Marcus gives me time off when the work is done, and I owe you for your hospitality. You owe us nothing, but if you want to visit again, you would be most welcome." Zara said nothing, but when Samuel glanced at her, he saw a slight color in her cheeks and a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. When it came time to leave, Samuel found himself reluctant to go. He saddled his horse slowly, checking and rechecking the straps. Zara walked out to see him off, and they stood together in the early morning light. "Thank you again," he said, "for everything." "You are welcome anytime, Sam, I mean that." He wanted to say something more, something about how he had not been able to stop thinking about her since he first saw her by the creek, how talking to her had made him feel more alive than he had in years. But the words stuck in his throat, and instead, he just nodded and mounted his horse. As he rode away, he looked back once and saw her standing there, her hand raised in farewell, and he knew with absolute certainty that he would be back. Not in a few weeks, but sooner. Much sooner. The ride back to Georgetown took most of the day, and Samuel spent it thinking about Zara. By the time he reached the ranch, he had made up his mind. He went straight to Marcus Sullivan, the ranch owner, and found him in the main house going over account books. "Sam, I heard you caught up with those thieves," Marcus said, looking up from his papers. He was a heavy-set man in his 50s with a thick beard and sharp eyes. "Got one of my horses back, too. I am grateful. The other man got away, but I do not think he will be back this direction." "Good enough. You look tired. Why do not you take a few days off? You have been working hard." "Actually, I wanted to talk to you about that. I met a family that could use some help with their farm, a father and daughter trying to keep a place running on their own. I was thinking I could help them for a day or two each week, if you could spare me." Marcus studied him with a knowing look. "A daughter, you say?" Samuel felt his face grow warm. "It is not like that. Son, I have been married for 30 years. I know what that look means. You are interested in this girl. I barely know her. Sometimes that is how it starts." Marcus leaned back in his chair. "You have been here a year now, and you are a good worker. Never complain, always reliable. But you have always seemed like you were waiting for something, or maybe running from something. If you found a reason to stop running, I am all for it. Take whatever time you need." "Thank you, Marcus. I appreciate it. Just one piece of advice. If you care about this girl, do not wait too long to tell her. Life is short, and chances do not come around twice." Samuel thought about those words as he lay in his bunk that night. Marcus was right. He had been running, or at least drifting, for years now. Maybe it was time to stop. 3 days later, he was back on the trail to the Jenkins farm, his saddlebags packed with supplies he had purchased in town. He told himself he was just being helpful, just repaying their hospitality. But when the farm came into view, and he saw Zara hanging laundry on a line. His heart began to race in a way that had nothing to do with the ride. She saw him coming and stopped what she was doing, one hand shading her eyes. When he was close enough to see her face clearly, he saw surprise and pleasure in her expression. "Sam, I did not expect to see you so soon." He dismounted, suddenly feeling foolish. "I told your father I would come back to help. I brought some supplies from town too, thought you might need them." "You did not have to do that. I wanted to." Thomas emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on his trousers. "Samuel, good to see you, son. Come to help an old man with some work, if you will have me. Always. Come on, I will show you what needs doing." Over the next several hours, Samuel worked alongside Thomas, repairing fences, mucking out the barn, and doing a dozen other tasks that had been waiting for someone with young, strong hands to tackle them. It felt good to do this kind of honest labor, work that would make a visible difference in someone's life. At midday, Zara brought them lunch, and they sat in the shade of a cottonwood tree eating sandwiches and drinking cool water from the well. Samuel found himself watching her as she talked with her father, noticing the way she laughed at his jokes, the way she brushed a stray strand of hair from her face, the way the sunlight brought out the red highlights in her auburn hair. "You are staring," Thomas said quietly when Zara went back to the house for more water. Samuel felt his face flush. "I apologize." "No need to apologize. She is worth staring at, and between you and me, I think she is pleased you came back." "How can you tell?" "She spent an hour this morning fixing her hair and changing her dress. She has not done that since Michael left." Thomas fixed Samuel with a serious look. "I like you, Sam. You seem like a decent man, but if you are going to court my daughter, I need to know your intentions are honorable." "Sir, I am not sure what my intentions are yet. I barely know her." "Sometimes you do not need long to know. I knew I would marry Zara's mother after talking to her for one afternoon. She was working at a trading post and I was passing through. I came back the next day and the day after that, and by the end of the week, I had asked her father for permission to court her. We were married 3 months later and I never regretted it for a single day." That is a nice story. It is a true story, and the point is, when you know, you know. Just be honest with yourself and with her. That is all I ask. When Zara returned with a pitcher of water, Samuel could not help but notice what her father had mentioned. She was wearing a dress he had not seen before, a soft green color that matched her eyes, and her hair was arranged more carefully than it had been during his first visit. She caught him looking and smiled, a little shyly, and Samuel felt that jolt of electricity again. He found excuses to come back the following week, and then the week after that. Each visit, he learned something new about Zara. She loved to read but had few books, so he began bringing her volumes from the small collection in Georgetown's general store. She had a talent for music and could play the old piano in the house with surprising skill. She was kind to animals and patient with her father's occasional grumpiness. She had a sense of humor that was both gentle and sharp, and with each visit, Samuel found himself falling deeper in love with her. It was on his 4th visit, about 6 weeks after their first meeting, that things changed. He had been helping Thomas with the spring planting, and when the work was done, he walked down to the creek to wash up. He found Zara there, once again tending to the wildflowers that grew along the bank. She had a new basket with her, and she was humming the same melody he remembered from that first day. "You really love those flowers," he said, announcing his presence so he would not startle her. She looked up and smiled. "I do. There is something about them that makes me happy. They are so delicate and beautiful, and yet they survive out here in the wilderness. They do not need anyone to care for them or protect them. They just grow and bloom because that is what they are meant to do." Samuel walked closer and crouched down beside her. "May I help?" of course. They worked together in comfortable silence for a while, selecting flowers and adding them to her basket. The afternoon sun was warm on Samuel's back, and he could hear the gentle burble of the creek and the distant call of birds. It was peaceful in a way that made his chest ache. "Sam," Zara said after a while, "can I ask you something? Anything? Why do you keep coming back here? I mean, I am glad you do, but you must have other things you could be doing with your time." This was the moment. He could make up some excuse about wanting to help her father or enjoying the work. But he remembered what Thomas had said about being honest, and he found he did not want to hide his feelings anymore. "I come back because of you," he said simply. "Because I think about you when I am not here. Because talking to you makes me feel like myself again in a way I had forgotten was possible. Because you make everything more beautiful." She had gone very still, her hands frozen in the act of reaching for a flower. When she looked at him, her eyes were wide and searching. "You make everything more beautiful," he repeated, the words coming straight from his heart. "Not just these flowers or this place, but the whole world. When I am with you, everything seems brighter and more alive." "Sam," she whispered, and there were tears shining in her eyes. "I know I do not have much to offer. I am just a ranch hand with a few dollars to my name and a past I am not proud of. But I am falling in love with you, Zara. I have been since that first day when I saw you here, and I cannot pretend otherwise anymore." A tear spilled down her cheek, and for a horrible moment, Samuel thought he had made a terrible mistake. But then she smiled, a brilliant, joyful smile that made his heart soar. "I am falling in love with you too," she said. "I did not think I would ever feel this way again, not after Michael. But you are nothing like him. You are honest and kind and strong, and when you look at me, I feel seen in a way I never did before." Samuel reached out and gently wiped the tear from her cheek. "May I kiss you?" "Yes," she breathed. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to change her mind, but she met him halfway. Their lips touched softly at first, tentative and sweet, and then with more certainty. Samuel felt like his heart might burst from his chest. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. "I want to court you properly," Samuel said, still holding her face gently in his hands. "With your father's permission, I want to do this right." "He will say yes," Zara said with a laugh. "He has been dropping hints about you every day since you started visiting." "Has he now?" "Oh, yes. How you are a hard worker, how you are respectful, how you have an honest face. I think he likes you more than I do." "That is not possible." They sat by the creek for another hour, talking and occasionally kissing, learning the feel of each other. When they finally walked back to the house hand in hand, Thomas took one look at them and smiled. "About time," he said. "Sir, I would like your permission to court your daughter," Samuel said formally. "You have it, and my blessing too. Just promise me you will treat her right." "I promise." "Then welcome to the family, son." The next few months were the happiest of Samuel's life. He spent every free moment at the Jenkins farm, helping with the work and spending time with Zara. They went on long walks through the mountains, talking about everything and nothing. He taught her to ride his horse, and she taught him the names of all the plants that grew in the high country. They read books together in the evening, sometimes aloud, sometimes in comfortable silence. He met her friends from town when they visited, and though some of them were curious about the ranch hand who had captured Zara's heart, they were universally kind once they got to know him. Zara came to Georgetown a few times to see where Samuel worked, and Marcus made a point of treating her with great respect, which earned him Samuel's eternal gratitude. As summer turned to fall, Samuel knew it was time to take the next step. He had saved every penny he could spare, and he had a plan forming in his mind. He talked to Marcus about it first. "I want to ask Zara to marry me," he said. but I need to be able to offer her a real home, not just a bunk in a ranch house. I was hoping you might know of a way I could buy some land, start a small operation of my own." Marcus leaned back in his chair, stroking his beard thoughtfully. "As it happens, I have been thinking about expanding. There is a section of land on the eastern edge of my property that I have never done much with. Good grazing land, a creek running through it, nice spot for a house. What if I sold it to you at a fair price? You could work for me part-time and build up your own herd the rest of the time. In a few years, you would have a solid operation." "That is more than generous, Marcus, but I could not ask you to do that." "You are not asking, I am offering. You have been a good worker and a good man. I want to help you get started. Besides, this way I keep you close by if I need extra hands during busy times." Samuel felt overwhelmed with gratitude. "I do not know what to say." "Say yes. Say you will build a good life with that girl. Say you will invite me to the wedding." "Yes to all of that." He went to see Thomas the next day to ask for Zara's hand in marriage. The older man listened to Samuel's plan and nodded approvingly. "You have really thought this through." "I want to give her a good life, sir. She deserves that and more, she does, and I think you will do right by her." "You have my blessing, Sam." Samuel proposed to Zara at the creek where they had first met. It was a cool October afternoon, and the aspens on the mountainsides were brilliant gold against the deep blue sky. He had picked wildflowers that morning, the same kinds she had been gathering that first day, and he presented them to her along with a simple gold ring he had purchased in Georgetown. "Zara Jenkins," he said, kneeling in the grass beside the water, "you have changed my life in every way that matters. You have given me a reason to stop running, a reason to build instead of just drift. I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" She was crying and laughing at the same time as she pulled him to his feet. "Yes, Sam. Yes, 1,000 times yes." They were married in late November, just before the first heavy snows came to the high country. The ceremony was simple, held in the small church in Georgetown with Marcus and his wife serving as witnesses along with Thomas and a handful of friends. Zara wore a dress of cream-colored silk that Marcus's wife had helped her sew, and she carried a bouquet of dried wildflowers, preserved from the summer. Samuel thought she had never looked more beautiful. They spent their first night as husband and wife in a hotel in Georgetown, a small luxury that Samuel insisted on despite Zara's protests that they did not need to spend the money. But he wanted this night to be special, wanted her to have good memories of the beginning of their married life. In the quiet darkness of their room, with Zara warm and soft in his arms, Samuel felt a peace he had not known since before the war. This was what he had been searching for all these years. Not adventure or excitement, but this simple, profound connection with another person. Home. They moved into a small cabin on the land Marcus had sold them, and they spent the winter making it their own. Samuel built furniture while Zara sewed curtains and made the place comfortable. Thomas visited often, pleased to see his daughter so happy and to have a son by marriage he could rely on. The work was hard, especially through the winter months, but Samuel had never been more content. He worked for Marcus 3 days a week and spent the other days building up his own small herd of cattle and making improvements to their property. Zara tended a large garden and sold vegetables in town when they had extra. Together, they were building something that mattered. In the spring, Zara told him she was pregnant. Samuel felt his heart might burst with joy. They had talked about wanting children, but he had not expected it to happen so quickly. "Are you happy?" Zara asked, a little uncertain. "Happy? Zara, I am more than happy. I am blessed beyond what I deserve." He pulled her into his arms and held her close. "You are giving me everything I ever wanted. A home, a family, a future. How could I be anything but happy? The pregnancy went well, though Samuel worried constantly. He made Zara promise not to overwork herself, and he took over more of the household tasks, despite her protests that she was perfectly capable. Thomas visited even more frequently, excited about the prospect of becoming a grandfather. Their son was born on a cold February morning in 1879, with Thomas pacing nervously in the main room while the doctor from Georgetown attended to Zara in their bedroom. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Samuel feared the worst. But Zara was strong, just like her mother had been, and when he finally heard the baby's cry, he felt tears streaming down his face. They named him James, after Samuel's father, and he was a healthy, squalling boy with a thick head of dark hair. Samuel held his son for the first time and felt a love so fierce and protective it almost frightened him. This tiny person depended on him completely, and Samuel swore silently that he would never let him down. Those early months of parenthood were exhausting but wonderful. Samuel learned to change diapers and soothe a crying baby. Zara managed the household and fed their son while recovering from the birth. Thomas was a doting grandfather who visited at least twice a week, always bringing some small gift for the baby. As James grew from an infant into a toddler, Samuel and Zara's small ranch began to thrive. Word got around about Samuel's honest dealings and hard work, and he started getting offers to help other ranchers with various tasks. The extra income allowed them to expand their herd and make improvements to their cabin. They added 2 rooms, one for James and one that could serve as a guest room when Thomas stayed over. By the time James was 3 years old, the ranch was turning a modest profit, and Samuel had hired a young hand to help with some of the work. He still helped Marcus during busy times, but his own operation was becoming self-sufficient. It was a good life, better than Samuel had ever imagined having. He loved the work, loved watching his son grow, and loved Zara more with each passing day. They had their challenges, of course. There were lean times when cattle prices dropped or when a harsh winter killed some of their herd. There were the everyday frustrations of living in a remote area where a simple trip to town required half a day. But they faced everything together, and that made all the difference. When James was 4, Zara became pregnant again. This time, it was a little girl they named Rose, after the wild roses that grew along the creek. She had Zara's red hair and Samuel's dark eyes, and from the moment she was born, she had her father wrapped around her tiny finger. Thomas doted on both grandchildren, often staying for weeks at a time to help out and spend time with them. He was getting older now, moving more slowly, but the joy the children brought him seemed to add years to his life. "You have given me more than you know," he told Samuel one evening as they sat on the porch watching James and Rose play in the yard. "After my wife died, I thought my life was essentially over, just a matter of waiting until it was my turn. But seeing Zara so happy, seeing these children, it has given me a reason to keep going. You are part of this family, Thomas. We need you. And I need you all. You have been a good husband to my daughter, Sam, better than I could have hoped for. I am grateful every day that you stopped by that creek. So am I. That was the day my real life began." The years continued to pass, marked by the seasons and the growth of their children. James grew into a serious boy who loved helping his father with the ranch work. Rose was more adventurous, always exploring and asking questions about everything she saw. Samuel and Zara taught them to read and write, to respect the land and the animals, to be kind and honest in all their dealings. When James was 8 and Rose was 4, tragedy struck. Thomas, who had been staying with them for a few weeks, did not wake up one morning. The doctor said it had been his heart, that he had gone peacefully in his sleep. It was a blessing in some ways, but that did not make the loss any easier. Zara grieved deeply for her father, and Samuel did his best to comfort her while dealing with his own sense of loss. Thomas had become not just a father in marriage but a true friend and mentor. The children, especially James, who was old enough to understand, were heartbroken. They buried Thomas on a hill overlooking their ranch with a simple marker that read, "Thomas Jenkins, beloved father and grandfather." At the funeral, Samuel held Zara as she cried, and he told their children stories about their grandfather, making sure they would remember him. In the weeks that followed, Samuel made sure to take the children to visit Thomas's grave regularly. They would bring wildflowers, especially in the spring and summer, and they would tell him about what was happening in their lives. It helped them all process the grief. Life went on as it always does. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. Samuel took on a partner, a young man named David who had worked for Marcus but wanted to strike out on his own. Together, they expanded the operation and began breeding horses in addition to raising cattle. James grew into a strong, capable young man who loved the ranch life as much as his father did. Rose was more interested in books and learning, and Samuel made sure she had access to education, even hiring a tutor from Georgetown to come once a week when she got older. When James was 15 and Rose was 11, Zara surprised them all with another pregnancy. She was 35 now, and they had thought their family was complete. But the baby, another boy they named Henry, was welcomed with joy by the entire family. James was old enough to be a real help, and Rose was thrilled to have a baby brother to care for. Samuel was 43 by then, graying at the temples and carrying a few more lines on his face, but he felt young when he held his infant son. This child represented the stability and peace he had built, proof that his life had meaning and purpose beyond the violence and drift of his younger years. As the 1880s progressed, the West was changing rapidly. The railroad finally came to Georgetown, bringing more people and more commerce. Towns were growing, and the wild frontier was slowly being tamed. Samuel watched these changes with mixed feelings. He appreciated the progress and the opportunities it brought, but he also mourned the passing of the simpler times. James, now a young man of 18, had started courting a girl from town, the daughter of the general store owner. She was a sweet girl named Hannah, and Samuel approved of the match. He could see the same kind of love developing between James and Hannah that he had experienced with Zara all those years ago. Rose, at 14, was already talking about becoming a teacher. She had a sharp mind and a love of learning that reminded Samuel of his own mother. He was determined to support her ambitions, even though many people thought higher education was wasted on women. Henry, now 5, was a bundle of energy who kept everyone on their toes. He had inherited his father's love of the outdoors and his mother's gentle nature. On a warm summer evening in 1892, the whole family gathered on their porch to watch the sunset. Samuel sat with Zara on one side and Henry on his lap. James and his now wife Hannah, married just 2 months earlier, sat together on the steps. Rose was stretched out on the porch floor with a book. "Papa," Henry asked, "tell us again how you and Mama met." Samuel smiled and exchanged a glance with Zara. They had told this story many times, but it never got old. "Well," he began, "I was riding through the mountains, tired and dusty and not sure where I was going in life. And then I came upon a creek, and there was the most beautiful woman I had ever seen, tending to wildflowers." "And what did you say to her?" Henry prompted, even though he knew the answer. "At first, I did not say much of anything. I was too stunned by her beauty. But later, when I realized how special she was, I told her that she made everything more beautiful. And I meant it then, and I still mean it now. Zara reached over and took his hand. And I told him I was falling in love with him too. Best decision I ever made. Second best, Samuel corrected gently. The best decision was choosing to stay with your father when you did. That showed me what kind of person you were. Everything else followed from that. James and Hannah exchanged a look that said they hoped to have the same kind of lasting love. Rose looked up from her book and smiled at her parents. Henry just snuggled closer to his father, content in the security of a happy family. As the sun set and the stars began to appear, Samuel reflected on the long journey that had brought him to this moment. He thought about the scared 18-year-old boy who had gone off to war, the lost young man who had drifted aimlessly after, the weary traveler who had stumbled upon a creek in the mountains and found his purpose. He thought about all the choices that had led him here, some good and some bad, but all ultimately leading to this porch, this family, this life. He thought about Thomas, buried on the hill, and wished the older man could see how well his daughter and grandchildren were doing. "What are you thinking about?" Zara asked softly. "How lucky I am, how grateful. We are the lucky ones," she said. "You gave us this life, this home. We built it together. That is what makes it special." Later that night, after the children had gone to bed and James and Hannah had walked back to their own small cabin nearby, Samuel and Zara sat together in their bedroom. She was brushing her hair, now threaded with gray but still beautiful, and he was removing his boots. "You ever regret it?" he asked. Marrying a drifter with nothing to his name, she turned to look at him, her expression serious. "Not for a single moment. You gave me a life filled with love and purpose. You have been a wonderful husband and father. What could I possibly regret? I just want to make sure you are happy." "Sam, I have been happy every day since you told me I made everything more beautiful. Those words changed my life. They made me see myself differently, made me believe that I was worth loving again after Michael broke my heart. You gave me that gift, and I will never stop being grateful for it." He crossed the room and pulled her into his arms. After all these years, she still fit perfectly against him. "I love you, Zara, more than I did on our wedding day, and I did not think that was possible. I love you too, always." They held each other in the quiet of the night, two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life that mattered. Outside, the wind whispered through the aspen trees, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to the moon. The ranch was quiet, the cattle settled in their pastures, the horses secure in their barn. Everything was as it should be. The years continued to roll by, bringing new joys and occasional sorrows. James and Hannah had their first child, making Samuel and Zara grandparents. Rose went to Denver to attend a teaching college, making the whole family proud. Henry grew into a thoughtful young man who loved both the ranch and learning. Samuel continued to work the land he loved, though he took on less of the physical labor as he aged. He and David ran the ranch together, with James taking on more responsibility each year. The operation had grown beyond what Samuel had ever imagined that first winter when he and Zara had struggled to make ends meet. But for all the changes and growth, some things remained constant. Every spring, Samuel and Zara would walk down to the creek where they had first met. They would bring wildflowers to plant along the banks, ensuring that there would always be beauty there. They would sit on the grass and remember that first day, the beginning of everything that mattered. "You know," Zara said on one of these visits when they were both in their 50s and their grandchildren were playing nearby, "I sometimes wonder what would have happened if you had not stopped that day, if you had just watered your horse and moved on." "I could not have moved on," Samuel said with certainty. "From the moment I saw you, I knew my searching was over. I was home. That is very romantic. "It is very true." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "We have had a good life, have we not? The best. Better than I ever deserved or imagined. We built it together. You and me, brick by brick, day by day. And I would do it all again in a heartbeat." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their grandchildren pick flowers just as Zara had done all those years ago. The creek bubbled over its familiar rocks. The mountains rose majestically in the distance. The sun was warm on their faces. Everything was as it had been and as it should be. As Samuel looked at his wife, at the gray in her hair and the lines on her face earned through years of laughter and hard work, he thought she had never been more beautiful. She had made his life worth living. She had given him purpose and love and a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. "You still make everything more beautiful," he said softly. She looked at him with those green eyes that still made his heart skip a beat. "And you still make me feel like the most cherished woman in the world. Because you are." They kissed then, a soft, sweet kiss that held decades of love and commitment. Their grandchildren giggled and made faces, but Samuel and Zara just smiled. Let the children laugh. They were young and could not yet understand the depth of feeling that came from years of choosing each other, day after day, through good times and hard times, through joy and sorrow. This was what love looked like. Not the passionate romance of new lovers, though they had certainly had that, but the deep, abiding connection of two people who had truly become one. They had built a life together, raised a family, weathered storms, and celebrated triumphs. They knew each other's flaws and loved each other anyway. They had grown old together, and in that growing they had only become more essential to each other. As the sun began to set and they gathered up their grandchildren to head back to the ranch, Samuel took one last look at the creek and the wildflowers. This place would always be special to him. It was where his real life had begun, where he had found not just love but himself. He took Zara's hand as they walked home, and she squeezed his fingers gently. No words were needed. They understood each other completely, in the way that only people who have shared a life truly can. And as they crested the hill and saw their ranch spread out before them, with the main house where they lived, the smaller cabin where James and his family resided, the barn and pastures and all the signs of a life well lived, Samuel felt a profound sense of peace and gratitude. This was his legacy. Not wealth or fame, but family and love and a piece of land cared for with dedication and respect. It was more than enough. It was everything. That evening, after dinner, when the family had gathered as they often did, Rose read aloud from a book of poetry while Hannah sewed and James worked on repairing a bridle. Henry played a game of checkers with one of his nephews. Samuel and Zara sat together in their rocking chairs, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically as she worked on a blanket for their newest grandchild. Samuel looked around at all of them, these people who had come from the love he and Zara shared, and he felt overwhelmed with emotion. This family, this legacy, it was more than he had ever thought to have. He was a simple man who had lived a simple life, but it had been a life filled with meaning and love. "What are you smiling about, Grandpa?" one of the children asked. "Just thinking about how blessed I am," Samuel replied honestly. "How blessed we all are to have each other." "Tell us a story, Grandpa," another child begged. "Tell us about the old days." And so Samuel did, spinning tales of his youth and his journey west, of meeting their grandmother by a creek and knowing immediately that his life had changed forever. He told them about building the ranch from nothing, about hard work and perseverance, about choosing love over fear. The children listened with wide eyes, and the adults smiled, having heard these stories many times but never tiring of them. Because these stories were their history, their foundation. They were the reason this family existed. When the evening grew late and the children were tucked into bed, when James and his family had returned to their cabin and Rose had gone to her room with her book, Samuel and Zara prepared for bed in their own room. "Another good day," Zara said as she climbed under the quilts. "Every day with you is a good day," Samuel replied, joining her. She laughed softly. "You have always been a romantic. Only with you." He pulled her close, fitting her body against his as he had done thousands of times before. She sighed contentedly and rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Sam," she whispered in the darkness. "Yes, my love. Thank you for stopping that day. Thank you for seeing me, for loving me, for building this beautiful life with me. Thank you for letting me. Thank you for taking a chance on a dusty drifter who did not know what he was looking for until he found it. We found each other. That is what matters. Yes, that is what matters." They drifted off to sleep in each other's arms, two souls who had found their home in each other. Outside, the stars wheeled across the vast western sky. The creek continued its eternal song. The wildflowers slept, waiting for morning light, and on the ranch that love had built, all was peaceful and well. The seasons continued their endless cycle. Winter snows gave way to spring flowers. Summer heat mellowed into autumn gold. Years passed, marked by birthdays and holidays, by births and deaths, by all the ordinary moments that make up a life. Samuel and Zara grew older together, their hair turning white, their steps slower but their love never wavering. They watched their children and grandchildren thrive. They saw the ranch continue to prosper under James's management. They lived to see Rose become a respected teacher in Denver, and Henry take over a section of the ranch to run his own operation. They celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary with a big party that brought together family and friends from all over Colorado. There were speeches and toasts, music and dancing. But the moment Samuel treasured most came late in the evening when he and Zara snuck away to walk down to their creek. 30 years, Zara marveled, looking up at the stars. "It has gone so fast. And yet I feel like I have known you forever," Samuel said, "like you have always been part of me." Perhaps we were always meant to find each other. Perhaps every choice we made, every path we took, was leading us to that day by the creek. I like that idea, that we were destined to be together. Destiny, fate, luck, divine providence, whatever you want to call it, I am grateful for it. She turned to face him, and even in the moonlight he could see the love shining in her eyes. "You are my great adventure, Sam, my great love, the best part of my life. And you are mine, always and forever mine." They kissed under the stars, beside the creek where their story began. Two people who had found everything they needed in each other. As they walked back to the ranch, arm in arm, Samuel knew that whatever time they had left, whether it was years or months or days, he would spend it loving this woman with everything in him. She had saved him in ways she would never fully understand. She had given him a reason to live instead of just exist, and he had done the same for her. Together, they had created something beautiful and lasting. Together, they had found home. The story of Samuel Xavier and Zara Jenkins was a simple one in many ways. A cowboy had found a woman tending wildflowers by a creek, and he had told her she made everything more beautiful. From that moment, from those words, an entire life had grown. A family had been created. A legacy had been built. It was not a story of grand adventures or dramatic rescues. It was a story of two people choosing each other every day, building a life together through hard work and dedication, raising a family with love and care, and creating a home where all were welcome. It was a love story, pure and simple, and it was real. It was the kind of story that echoed through generations, told and retold by children and grandchildren, a reminder that true love existed, that it was worth fighting for, that it could transform lives. And on quiet evenings when the family gathered, and someone asked how Samuel and Zara had met, the answer was always the same. He had been a drifter looking for purpose, and she had been a woman tending wildflowers, and they had found each other in a moment that changed everything. "You make everything more beautiful," he had said, and he had meant it with his whole heart. Those words had been a gift, a promise, a beginning. They had been the first words of a love story that would last a lifetime, a story that would be passed down through generations, a story that proved that sometimes the best things in life come when you least expect them. All because a cowboy stopped his horse by a creek and saw a woman tending wildflowers and had the courage to speak from his heart. All because a woman who had been hurt before chose to trust again, to open her heart again, to believe in love again. Their story was a testament to hope and second chances, to the power of honest words and true feeling, to the beauty that can grow when two people commit to building something together. It was a reminder that home is not a place but a person, and that love, true love, makes everything more beautiful. Samuel and Zara lived well into their 70s, never spending a night apart if they could help it, never letting a day go by without telling each other they were loved. They saw their great-grandchildren born and held them in arms that shook with age but were still strong with love. And when Samuel finally passed peacefully in his sleep, Zara was beside him, holding his hand, whispering that she loved him, that she would always love him. She followed him 6 months later, dying in the same bed they had shared for so many years, surrounded by children and grandchildren who had all benefited from the love story that had started by a creek. They were buried side by side on the hill next to Thomas, with a shared headstone that read simply, "Samuel and Zara Xavier, they made everything more beautiful." Below were the dates of their births and deaths, and below that, the words "together forever." The ranch continued on, passed down through the family, a living legacy of the life they had built. And every spring, someone from the family would walk down to the creek and plant wildflowers along the banks, ensuring that beauty would always bloom there, just as it had the day Samuel first saw Zara kneeling by the water. Their story became family legend, told and retold, a reminder of what was possible when two people found each other and chose love over fear, commitment over uncertainty, togetherness over solitude. It was a story of the West, of hard work and dedication, of building something from nothing and making it last. But most of all, it was a love story. A simple, profound, beautiful love story about a cowboy who found his home in a woman's heart, and a woman who found her happiness in a cowboy's love. It was a story that began with wildflowers and words spoken from the heart, and it never really ended because love like that never does. It lives on in the lives it touched, the family it created, the legacy it built. And so, even now, generations later, when the family gathers at the ranch and someone asks about Samuel and Zara, the story is told again. How he stopped by the creek and saw her there with the flowers. How he told her she made everything more beautiful. How they fell in love and built a life together that became the foundation for everyone who came after. It is a story worth telling, worth remembering, worth celebrating, because it is a story of hope and love and home. It is a story that reminds us that the most important things in life are the simplest. Love, family, a place to call home, someone to share it all with. That is what Samuel and Zara found in each other, and that is what they gave to everyone who came after them. It is a gift that keeps giving, a legacy that never fades, a love story for the ages. And it all started with a creek, some wildflowers, and a cowboy who had the courage to speak from his heart.